William Shakespeare's Macbeth is a tragedy in 5 acts. It was most probably written in 1606. The play was published in the first folio of 1623. It is considered to be one of Shakespeare's most intense plays that displays the destructive nature of over ambition and greed for power. Macbeth's tragic downfall was caused due to this. Delineated as a courageous and highly esteemed Scottish general at the outset of the play, Macbeth and Banquo, another army general, are seen to return from a battlefield. They had been sent to crush the rebellion of Thane of Cawdor. The rebel army was being assisted by the troops of Norway. Having succeeded in vanquishing the rebel army, both Macbeth and Banquo were now returning home when suddenly, in the midst of a thunderstorm, in the middle of a deserted heath, they sighted 3 withered, strangely attired, bearded, women-like creatures. These 3 weird creatures were dancing and singing. Fair is foul, and foul is fair. Fair is foul, and foul is fair. Over through the fog and fill the air. Over through the fog and fill the air. Now these 3 unearthly-looking creatures, who were actually witches, greeted Macbeth, and the first witch startled him by hailing him as the Thane of Glamis, a title which had been bestowed upon Macbeth by King Duncan, who was also his close relative. But how did the witch know him? Thought Macbeth. He had never met them before. Macbeth was further stunned by the prediction made by the second witch. She hailed him as the Thane of Cawdor. But the Thane of Cawdor was still alive, thought Macbeth. Then how could he acquire the title? Then the third witch made a prediction that confounded Macbeth. You will be the King of Scotland hereafter, said the witch. The 3 witches also made predictions about Banquo. One said that Banquo would be lesser than Macbeth and greater. The second witch stated that Banquo would not be so happy, yet much happier in comparison to Macbeth, while the third witch's prophecy was that although Banquo would never reign as the King of Scotland, yet his successors would become kings. The witches then disappeared into thin air. Soon a messenger came along bearing the good news that Macbeth had been conferred by King Duncan the title of the Thane of Cawdor. Hearing this, Macbeth began to wonder if the third prediction of the witch too would eventually turn out to be true. Forbidden hope and ambition began to simmer in his heart and mind. When Macbeth's wife came to know about the predictions of the 3 witches from her husband, particularly about the fulfillment of the second prophecy, she grew very excited. She was an extremely ambitious woman who desired eminence for her husband. She now decided to make the third prediction come true, even if it meant foul play. Her conspiring mind began to scheme on how to assassinate King Duncan, who would be coming along with his sons Malcolm and Dolabin to visit Inverness, Macbeth's castle. Lady Macbeth began to coax and cajole a reluctant Macbeth to murder the king. Camouflaging her evil intentions, Lady Macbeth then pretended to play the role of a perfect hostess when King Duncan arrived at Inverness. Well aware of the fact that her husband's tender disposition, which she described as too full of the milk of human kindness, could hinder the plan of assassinating the king, Lady Macbeth at first decided to commit the murder of the king herself. She approached the king's bedchamber with a dagger in hand, but as she gazed upon the sleeping king's gentle face, her hand shook. Duncan's face seemed to resemble her own father's, and she could not bring herself to commit the heinous crime. So she returned, and once again urged Macbeth to perpetrate the deed of assassination. However, Macbeth's conscience was at first against it, for Macbeth was not only a trusted subject of King Duncan, but also a kinsman, and as the king was now his guest, it was Macbeth's duty to protect the king. Would not his reputation be ruined for ever if he executed the foul deed? Thought Macbeth. Lady Macbeth, on the other hand, refused to listen to the conflicts that were going on in Macbeth's troubled mind. She was too determined in her wickedness to be shaken off easily from her purpose. So she began to accuse Macbeth of cowardice and fickleness, till Macbeth finally resolved to dismiss the vacillations of his conscience stricken mind and advanced towards King Duncan's bedchamber. As he did so, he imagined, or rather hallucinated, another blood-stained dagger floating in the air, and the handle of the dagger seemed to be pointed towards him. The blade of the dagger was dripping with blood, and seemed to guide him to Duncan's chamber. The following soliloquy, uttered by Macbeth, distinctly brings out the fear of his terrified mind.
Is this a dagger which I see before me, the handle toward my hand? Come, let me clutch thee. I have thee not, and yet I see thee still. Art thou not fatal vision, sensible to feeling as to sight? Or art thou but a dagger of the mind, a false creation proceeding from the heat oppressed brain? I see thee yet, in form as palpable as this which now I draw. Thou marshallest me the way that I was going, and such an instrument I was to use. Mine eyes are made the fools of other the senses, or else worth all the rest. I see thee still, and on thy blade and dudgeon gouts of blood, which was not so before. There's no such thing. It is the bloody business which informs thus to mine eyes. Now over the one half world nature seems dead, and wicked dreams abuse the curtained sleep. Witchcraft celebrates pale Hecate's offerings and withered murder. Alarmed by his sentinel, the wolf, whose howls his watch, thus with his stealthy pace, with Tarquin's ravishing strides towards his design, moves like a ghost. Thou sure and firm set earth, hear not my steps, which way they walk, for fear thy very stones prate of my whereabout, and take the present horror from the time which now suits with it. Whilst I threat, he lives. Words to the heat of deeds too cold breath gives. I go, and it is done. The bell invites me. Hear it not, Duncan, for it is a knell that summons thee to heaven or to hell.
At last, overcoming his fear, Macbeth committed King Duncan's murder. Lady Macbeth sprinkled blood on the sleeping guards of Duncan, and blood smeared their knives so that they could be suspected of the heinous crime. In the morning, Macduff and Lennox, two noblemen, discovered the murder of the king. The news spread. Duncan's sons then fled for fear of their own lives. Malcolm went to England while Donalbain sought shelter in Ireland. In the absence of an heir, Macbeth was declared King of Scotland. Now that two of the witch's predictions had turned out to be true, Macbeth feared that the third prophecy about Banquo's successors becoming kings too would also come true, so he decided to remove Banquo. Macbeth and his wife arranged a banquet and invited all the important noblemen and thanes to the feast. Banquo and his son Fleance, too, were invited. Assassins were hired to kill the father and the son on their way to the feast. Banquo got killed, but Fleance managed to escape. At the feast, while he was pretending to lament the absence of his dear friend Banquo, Macbeth saw the ghost of Banquo. Banquo appeared to be occupying the seat reserved for him. It was a nightmarish experience for Macbeth, and he became pale with fear, and he addressed the ghost with distracted words. Dreading that the secret of the murder of Banquo would be revealed before all the noblemen by the strange behavior of Macbeth, Lady Macbeth at once tactfully and hastily bade farewell to all the guests. Both Macbeth and his wife then lost peace of mind, being plagued with fear and distrust for everyone around them. They could sense that some noblemen were beginning to grow suspicious of them. The thought that Fleance was alive rankled their minds. So once again Macbeth sought out the witches to know his future. This time he met them within a cave near the heath. There they were preparing a potion within a huge cauldron, which was placed on fire. The ingredients of the boiling concoction included the eye of a newt, the tongue of a dog, the leg of a lizard, the tooth of a wolf, the gall of a goat, the finger of a dead child, and other horrible things. The witches conjured up infernal spirits to answer the queries of Macbeth. An image of an armed head warned Macbeth to beware of the Thane of Fife, that is, Macduff. Another apparition that looked like a blood bathed child told Macbeth that he had nothing to fear of a man born naturally of a woman's womb. The third spirit that revealed a crowned child with a tree in hand told Macbeth that he would be defeated only when the great Burnham woods would come to the Dunsinane hill where Macbeth now resided. Reassured that a forest could never come up the hill to the castle, Macbeth grew confident and also ruthless. When he learned that Macduff, the Thane of Fife, had fled to England to join the army which was formed against Macbeth, the latter immediately had the wife and children of Macduff murdered. Macbeth's ruthlessness alienated the nobility from him. In the meantime, Lady Macbeth was beginning to have terrible nightmares. She took to sleepwalking. Her guilty mind could find no moment of repose. She imagined that her hands were stained with blood. Unable to bear the sufferings of a guilty mind, Lady Macbeth ultimately took her own life. Macbeth now became alone. He began to wish for death, yet refused to give up without a fight. The witches' prophecies gave him false hopes. So, when a messenger approached him with the news that the woods of Burnham were seen to be moving uphill towards Dunsinane, Macbeth was dumbstruck. He ran to see the sight himself. Actually, Macduff and Malcolm were advancing with an army towards the castle, and the marching soldiers carried branches in their hands to conceal their actual numbers. Although unprepared for the attack, Macbeth fought bravely. At first, he thought he had nothing to fear about Macduff. However, it was soon found that Macduff's birth was uncommon. Then Macbeth realized that the sayings of the witches were ambivalent, equivocal, and he never should have trusted them. Without accepting defeat or surrendering to his enemies, Macbeth fought with valor till his last breath. After his death, Malcolm ascended the throne of Scotland.